Hi, Jeff. This is Lev Nelik. I decided to record this video with a question I have. And maybe my question will help to clarify um, what we learn in your wonderful class. We're learning a Talmud on Rosh Hashanah. But I think sometimes we'll come across questions that are maybe not clear. I wonder if I'm the only one who is not clear on some of the questions, or maybe some other people have similar issues and questions. There's not too many questions asked in your class. And I'm just wondering, did everybody in class understand it? I'm the only one who is kind of backwards, or maybe other people maybe miss something too and just too polite or shy to ask and to show that they don't know something. So my comments, I hope you appreciate my comments because it's honest comments, and we're learning Talmud, we're learning Torah for truth, for emet. And emet doesn't have a personalities, it has truth. So I'll ask my question, and I probably have a lot of gaps in my questions and mistakes, misunderstanding. Please don't get it the wrong way. Please get it as a constructive. And okay, so this is a question, a fundamental question. I spoke to Adrian, and I think both Adrian and I are confused about a couple of things and not clear, and we didn't have time. Of course, in the class, we're doing our class with you once a week on Wednesdays, 8 o'clock Israel time for an hour and a half. And of course, in this rate, by the time we're 250 years old, we may get to half of the Shas. So obviously, our objective, I assume, is not to go through entire Shas. If we did that, we'll be doing Daf Yomi every day a page. It takes us 7 years to do that. Our objective, I understand it, is not really a speed, quick, I have to finish the material, because if we did that, we're not going to finish material anyway. But to understand really, instead of a lot of material, take a shorter portion, but to really understand it. And I'm finding my own experience, oftentimes people get a little bit discouraged from what we'll call a religious world to interacting with less religious world, if you will, with what I think the less religious or perceived lack of answers to the question they have. And many times I think what happens, we will say, well, if somebody asks a question, well, really, if you don't understand it, I don't have time to waste, just go away, or never mind. So implication is a little bit, maybe, I don't know if I want to use the word arrogance, but if we just brush people off, like you're too meager-minded or not prepared or doesn't have a background, that turns people off. I think we need to find a way, even from a position of knowledge, to present this knowledge. I'm not being critical, I'm just saying in general. I know from my own experience, I teach classes on pumps, not the Talmud, pumps, but I have a similar situation. If I teach my class and I just brush answer questions off, I have to get to the end of the material, people say, well, you have to get to the end of the material, then do it on your own. Unfortunately, you lost me. So anyway, to the topic. In the Rosh Hashanah, page 11a, we talk about, this is the thing. Let's see, and Adrian probably will join me in positively that in welcoming my question. A lot of gaps in my logic that I'll present now, and maybe mistakes and errors, but that's just the first rough draft, non-edited rough draft. Rabbi, on page 11a, Rosh Hashanah, you mentioned, we're looking at it, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua, both of them are two generations Tanas. Two generations Tanas, good friends, students of first generation Tana, Rabban Ben Zakkai, Yochanan Ben Zakkai, who met the emperor of Rome, Vespasian, on the way to conquer Jerusalem. So these people of a high stature, and of course the famous student of both Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Eliezer is Rabbi Akiva, the third generation Tana. So I'll put the first 11a page on the screen. We'll try to share the screen so we can look at it. All right, let's see. Let me open that. So the first one is, here's a page. And there's 10 pages I want to go through. All right, so here's a page. So Rabbi Eliezer, I'll just give a little background, and the page is on the screen, so if somebody who looks from our group, they're recording, they can follow it if they don't have a copy of the Talmud pages in front of them. So, okay, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua basically saying two things, more than two, but I concentrate on two. One, the world was created on which months? Now, of course, we can say, who cares which months? Well, that's a different conversation. It's important to know which months, but I'm not going to cover in this. It's a different discussion. And basically, the narrow things down to is a Tishrei or Nisan. There's a 6 months between Tishrei and Nisan. Nisan is the first month, Exodus from Egypt, and Tishrei is a formation, creation of the world. There's a differences between this month, Nisan and Tishrei, and any other months, and because of the agricultural cycle. So many times, like Adrian and I and our English-speaking group on Tuesdays that we meet, we discuss it. We discuss the reasons behind logic and how faith, religion, and logic merge together or mesh together. Well, here's one attempt to present the logic. In Nisan, it's a springtime. Things are just beginning to wake up. It happens to be Nisan. It's a known fact that, well, you can say the months before Nisan, after Nisan, it's still spring, but Nisan is kind of established tradition that things beginning to sprout, beginning to come about. 6 months later, in Tishrei, that's basically when agricultural cycle is completed. Shortly after Sukkot, come the rains, a strong rain and a weak rain, and later on, rain will saturate the ground, and comes the next Nisan. So there's a difference between Nisan Iyar or Adar or Sheshvan. Those other months do not have as much fundamental significance in its agricultural cycle as Nisan and Tishrei. So in our studies for 11 pages, we talked about why is it not Iyar or Av or some other months. We talked about that as well. But for now, concentrate to what we arrived to, just having two as a choice, Tishrei or Nisan. So Rabbi Eliezer is saying that the creation of the world happened to be in Tishrei, like it is, world Tishrei. Rabbi Yeshua is saying it happened in Nisan. And what is there? And what is there? Here's the reason. So if you look at the page, they both quote the page from the Torah. Let me bring this page. Okay. That's page in Hebrew. That's in Breshit, chapter 1, pasuk 11 and 12. Here's 11 and 12. And let me just put it in Hebrew translation. I happen to have Art Scroll Torah, and Art Scroll Torah says here, translation, pasuk 11 says, God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, herbage yielding seed, fruit trees yielding, and so on. And that 12 says, and the earth brought first vegetation. So the first one, 11, says, let the earth sprout vegetation. And the second one, the verse brought, maybe started to bring, the process of bringing vegetation. Those two pasukim. So coming back to our first page here, Rabbi Yeshua is saying here that God created the world in Tishrei with everything already there. In other words, there were apples and oranges, whatever happens to be in Tishrei, ready to go. It was rainy season too. It's another question can be asked. Well, if everything was there, why did it have to be rainy season? You don't need the rain. Normally, like now, there's nothing yet produced. So we need rain to saturate the earth to ultimately, by the time we plant wheat, we plant grains, it will nicely come up in Nisan, but you don't need the rain really yet if already everything is created. Maybe for the second year, you need a normal cycle. But the first year, there's no need for the rain. So when it says here, and the mist arose from the earth, as Rabbi Eliezer brings out as a partial proof that that's what the world was created. That could be a question. Well, it didn't need the mist at the time because everything was created already ripened and ready to eat. That's just one comment. But we can say, if we go back to Eliezer's point, so he is saying everything was created ready to go. And because that is what we see normally in Tishrei, everything is ready. That means the world was created in Tishrei. Rabbi Yeshua, of course, translates this, here's Rabbi Yeshua, that the land brought forth vegetation, and he says, this verse implies that at creation, the land was only beginning to bring forth the vegetation, and the trees were only beginning to produce fruits. That means that's more evolutionary process, if you will. Things just happen, and later on they will grow. And that's why things are just beginning to happen. That happens to Nisan. So that is a Nisan. And then this is fundamentally how Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua justifying their position. One, Rabbi Eliezer says the world was created, boom. So Adam Harishon was already created with a belly button, even though he didn't have a normal birth, yet belly button was there at certain age, and Eve was created from him, or separated by the Kabbalah from half of Adam, created already in their age. All right. Rabbi Yeshua say, no, it was an evolutionary process. Things happen to, first you have to get rain, things have to grow, and ultimately reach that. So it starts from Nisan, not to Tishrei. That's how they explain, if I understand, the creation of the world. Now, I happen to have also a Torah translation, a different edition, and they don't translate, and the God said, let the earth put forth grass, not the way ArtScroll translates, and actually in a Talmud, in an English translation of a Talmud page, says, let the earth sprout. It says, let the earth put forth grass. It doesn't say it created like that. Let the earth put forth. Let it happen. That the process begin. You can understand. You can translate it. Let the earth sprout. English translation is not what they say in the page of the Talmud. Let me bring the page of the Talmud again. How did the Talmud translate it there? How did the ArtScroll translate it? They say here. God said, let the land be covered with vegetation. That is covered instantaneously. That's not how the ArtScroll translated. And my Hebrew is not good enough to translate it exactly, but if you look in the Hebrew verses here, you say, Tadasheh haaretz. Does it really translate, let it be covered, or let it bring forth, implying the future? That's just one question that I think brings a little bit of a whole stone into the whole logic. Okay, so that needs to be explained better than was explained in class, and certainly better than I'm explaining right now. So let's go to page number 5. So that's about the creation of the world. Then the next one, very interesting, is which month's patriarchs were born, and Abraham and Isaac, Abraham and Jacob, patriarchs. And there's also Rabbi Eliezer believed that Abraham, our patriarchs were born in Tishrei, and of course Rabbi Yeshua is born in Nisan. Now they have this is very interesting logic, if I understand what you said, Jeff. Basically, like if you look at this, Rabbi Eliezer develops that in 4 steps. I call it A, B, C, and D. in step number one, here, he first brings, of course, for that, we have to assume that, of course, we believe in Torah, in prophets, in our holy scriptures. If we don't believe in that, then we might as well close the screen right here and go to a different class. This is not a class to disprove Torah. Our class is to show, to talk about Torah and find reason and logic if we're interested to understand why Torah said this and that. So I'm not here to disprove it, but I'm trying to, for those of us, including myself, who don't understand and the logic doesn't seem to make sense, to find justification for, to find reason behind this logic, instead of saying, well, if it doesn't make sense to me, then Torah is just a bunch of hodgepodge pages. I'm not interested. Well, if I took that position, it's a bunch of hodgepodge pages, I don't need to take this class. So I say, thank you for coming. See you later. The class for disproving Torah is across the street. Go ahead and join. There's a lot of people who want to show that how Torah is all a bunch of nonsense. That's not the class. This class is about Torah that had a lot of meaning, a lot of wise people, our sages, and we're trying to understand what is their logic. So this is just my interpretation. Rabbi Eliezer develops it in 4 steps. In step number 1, he brings the Shir HaShirim. So he goes to Shir HaShirim, and I'm going there too. Here it is. And he basically takes that King Solomon, here it is. They gathered before King Solomon, every man of Israel, for the festival of Sukkot in the months of Etanim, which is the 7th month. Step number 1, A. I'm not going to go to explain why the 7th month Tishrei. We'll take it that portion as for granted. Tishrei is the 7th month. And this pasuk 8, King Solomon, Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, chapter 8, pasuk 2, equate Etanim with 7th month, with Tishrei. Tishrei has something to do with Etanim, in the months of Etanim. So hold that thought. That is step number 1. We connected Tishrei with Etanim. Rabbi Eliezer now goes to a next source, next quote, and that is from Bamidbar, where Balak is trying to put a curse and being blessed to the Jewish people. And he is here in Kings 1 in chapter I'm sorry, not Kings 1, Numbers, in Parashat Balak 20 verse 24 chapter verse 21. He said, so Balak is seeing Kenites and declaimed his parable and said, strong is your dwelling, and set in a rock is your nest. So the word strong, I don't have a Hebrew translation on the parallel page, but basically it says Eitan, or Eisan, as Kenadi will say. Eitan is your dwelling. So Eitan, this verse implies from the meaning of the sentence, what is he talking about? The dwelling is Eitan. Eitan is your dwelling, and set in a rock is your nest. So we translate it as a strong or mighty is your dwelling. So now the Eitan connects to mighty. Eitan is mighty. First, 8 step, we connected Tishrei, King Solomon, to Eitan. Now Eitan to mighty. We go to 8th page now. The next step, step number 3, or C. That page, that is from prophet Micah, or Micah, and that's 6, pasuk 2. That says here, listen, you Eitanim, to the grievance of Hashem. Listen, you mountains, Harim, I'm sorry, to the grievance of Hashem, and you Eitanim, bedrock, translates by ArtScroll, the foundation of the earth. Listen, you mountains. So the Micah rebukes us for not following Hashem's rule, and he tells us about listen, you mountains, listen, your bedrock. It's an allegorical approach to the nature. Listen, the world, what I'm telling you. Listen to Hashem. So now, mountains, Harim, are connected to bedrock, which is in Hebrew, which here it's Eitanim, ArtScroll translated as bedrock, but basically Eitanim here translates as connected to mountains. So we know now Eitanim has to do with mountains. So we'll go to the next step, step number 4. Okay, step number 4, and that is from Song of Songs. And the Song of Songs here says, the voice of my beloved, behold it came, leaping over the mountains, skipping over the hills. Talks about mountains and skipping over the hills. And that word in the skipping of the mountains, very allegorical. Now, explanation here, or traditional explanation, is that we're saying that God will cut the number, 190 years of exile to a shorter time. He'll skip over the decree of the slavery for us, and he'll save us earlier. And that meaning of this verse, our sages interpreted, traditionally interpreted, is that skipping over the mountains, it's translated, could be translated in Hebrew, not skipping over the mountains, but because of the mountains. If you look in Hebrew text, it can be understood as because of the mountains. Because in the merit of the mountains. Okay, so mountains have merit. And who has merit? Well, mountains have to do with patriarchs, because of merits of patriarchs. And why do we know that? Well, here, the final page here, that is from back to Talmud page, Talmud 11, in article 11a3. It talks over here that step number D, the final 4th step, is skipping because of the mount, because of mountains, not over the mountains, and because of the merit of patriarch. So mountains equated to patriarch. If you look at the note here, 31 and 32, 31, 31, it goes to Rabbeinu Hananel Aruch, and it says the word Harim and the parents Harim are spelled similar, not the same, but have the same root. Hey root, hey rosh, yud kom, hey vav rosh, yud mem. I'm sorry, hey rosh, yud mem, hey vav rosh, yud mem, Harim, Harim. So mountains and parents have very similar sounding word, the same root. So mountains are equated to the parents. And who are our parents? Our initial parents are our patriarchs. So coming back again, we can say from that logic that Rabbi Eliezer brings in, let's just repeat what I said to summarize it. King Solomon dedicated the temple in Tishrei, and he uses the word etanim. So etanim has to do with Tishrei. Balak talks about stronger your dwellings, using etanim in your dwellings. We understand that your dwellings are strong, mighty. So now etanim connects to mighty. Step number 3 from Micah, Prophet Micah, etanim also relates to mountains. Okay, etanim mountains. So now we know mountains and strengths, might, and mountains are connected. And finally, on the final step, mountains being Harim and Harim parents. So mighty are connected to the parents, and parents are forefathers, and therefore from our forefathers, for fathers, then we connect to patriarchs. 4 steps. Did anybody miss this logic? Let me do it again. Let me do it again. From step A, Tishrei is connected to etanim. Okay, etanim connected to mighty. Etanim also connected to mountains. So etanim mighty, etanim mountains. Therefore, mighty connected to mountains. Who are the mountains? Parents, because Harim, Harim. So etanim connected to the parents, to patriarch. And if etanim connected to patriarchs, coming back to Solomon, that etanim was connected in Tishrei, that means Tishrei is connected to the patriarchs. So the months of the patriarchs, when the patriarchs were born. That is how the logic goes through these pages to prove in Rabbi Eliezer's point that indeed the patriarchs were born in months of Tishrei. You can go through this recording one more time to see if it's not clear. If somebody listening to says, well, I don't buy that logic, it doesn't make sense, I would say you don't have to buy that. But at least you have to listen through this and understand what I'm trying to convey first. Not just, yeah, listen, it's just a bunch of mumbo jumbo. It's a bunch of something I don't understand. You cannot weigh it like that. My logic is probably faulty or not clear or maybe weak, but I would like to have a counter thought brought to that with a more with attempt to understand first. So let's focus on that. So now Rabbi Yeshua doesn't agree with this derivation. Rabbi Yeshua said it is Nisan when the patriarchs were born, and he's saying because it states, and Rabbi Yeshua brings in the pasuk from Kings, also 6:1, Solomon's dedication of the temple. It's on the back over here, Kings 6:1. And he is saying here that also that the Exodus, children of Israel from the land of Egypt in the 4th year of King Solomon's reign, in the months of Ziv. It was happening in the months of Ziv. He also goes to Kings, but a different portion of that, and say the months of Ziv. And Ziv in Hebrew translates as Zivanim, radiant ones. Who are the radiant ones? Patriarchs. So therefore, it happened in the months of Ziv, or months of patriarchs, and that and therefore here it is. Therefore, which one month is radiant? Well, he explains in here the first month following the birth. We're born in Nisan. Radiance. Okay, Nisan. Now later on, so this is Rabbi Yeshua logic, radiance. So when nature is radiant, when it just begins to come forth, radiance of patriarchs, they are radiant ones, and the nature wakes up in Nisan, beginning of the agricultural season. Therefore, patriarchs were born in Nisan from this pasuk. You can ask questions. I mean, I'm not convinced with this logic myself. How do we know that radiance reflects to patriarchs? Maybe reflects to a creation or something else radiant. Maybe radiant means our kings or something else. I mean, I can come to, but why necessarily radiance? What does it say? That radiance is necessarily patriarchs. Okay. And also why radiance associated with a nature waking up. Yes, it's a radiant nature, it's allegorical point, but do I have to agree that there are a lot of other things can be radiant, not necessarily waking of nature, maybe radiance of the stars, and the stars most radiant in certain time of the year, maybe the months of Sheshvan. So that logic is not really convincing the way I am explaining, but I'm trying. Okay. So each of the rabbis, Eliezer and Yeshua, have to explain each other's position. He's saying, well, how do you, Rabbi Yeshua, answer Rabbi Eliezer on his logic with the Eitanim? And how do you, Rabbi Eliezer, explain the verse for the logic of the radiance? How do you explain your opponent's position? So Rabbi Yeshua would say, well, the mighty, I don't take mighty as equated with Eitanim and make these 4 steps of Rabbi Eliezer. I equate mighty as that they're mighty with mitzvot. So that month is a mighty with mitzvot. In the months of Tishrei, a lot of mitzvot. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, lots of things. That's a month loaded with mighty deeds. That's what mighty points to. Not the mighty goes to the mountains and Harim, that's nothing to do with that. Rabbi Eliezer is saying, how do you explain the months of Ziv? He will say it's the radiance of the trees. Indeed, that's radiance of Ziv. That is, he said that Ziv, it's a month of, Rabbi Yehuda says, yeah, Rabbi Eliezer is saying that is the radiance of the trees, as Rav Yehuda said. Okay, and then in Nissan we go, we say the blessing for Nissan for the trees. That's a very common thing to do, and heads approved. So that is how I would explain that logic. But I hope it can be explained better than I explained. But this is what happens when we have a groups. Typically, we study Torah with a group of people, mixed backgrounds. Some might have been through Shas 100 times, and some people never even went to the shul. And the first time they're joining the group, they don't know. They obviously have more questions. And this question must be answered. And of course, again, I'm saying if we don't have to answer these questions, sorry, I don't have time to answer, go ask somebody else. Maybe that's an answer, not an answer that I would like to have. In conclusion, I want to say, okay, all these allegories, how all these allegories come about? How do you know if a bird flew over Israel, as the Talmud or Midrash says, and the bird fell and wiped out 60,000 towns? Can it possibly be? Can Adam HaRishon be 600 feet tall? I mean, what is it? How can I trust anything Talmud is saying? Well, here's an example I found in Art Scroll book commentary to the Shir Hashrim. And he's saying like this. In Russia, there was a lot of decrees against the Jews. And it was very common that rabbis from a shtetl would travel to St. Petersburg with the petitions to annul the decrees. And one time, here's I'm reading, so one rabbi comes in and the Tsar official is telling him, you Jews, strange people, you take things like completely silly, written in Talmud, and you're taking it as something serious. It doesn't make any sense. How do you trust this stuff? How can you believe it for 3,500 years? No wonder nobody likes you, because you make up the stories like that. So the rabbi explained to him like this. He says, Rabbi answered, you know very well that the Tsar and his advisors have often planned decrees that would ordeal the expulsion of the Jews. If God had not thwarted your plan, the decree would have been written and placed before Tsar, okay, for his signature. And he would have dipped his pen into the inkwell and signed it. And his signature would have made final the greatest Jewish catastrophe in centuries, will wipe on the whole Jewish by his signature, by his dropping into the ink. A poet might have written that a drop of ink drowns 3 million people. All of us would have understood that what he meant. But 100 years later, Adrian and myself, two of us will come and say, this is just nonsense. The drop of ink killed 3 million people. Adrian, just a joke for the two of us. It's a good way of asking these questions. That's a nonsense. It's a contriving sentence we can come up from that. Could a small drop of ink drown people? In truth, the expression is apt and pithy. It is only a lack of knowledge that could lead a reader to dismiss it out of hand. So it is with many parables of our sages. They were written in the form of far-fetched stories to conceal their meaning from those unqualified to understand. Those same unqualified people laugh at the stories instead of lamenting their own puny stature. That's me. I sometimes ask questions and then I realize that I really don't have a background, and in general history as well, many figures of speech have an obvious meaning to those familiar with them, but would be incomprehensible to the uninitiated. Everyone knows that a shot cannot be heard more than several hundred yards away. But every American knows, and British perhaps do, that a shot heard around the world began the American Revolution. That is the little bit story, the ending, my little presentation, my little analysis. Lots of holes in it, lots of errors, but I thought maybe this type of analysis hopefully was a desire to put some clarity in the logic, will help us maybe not to run too fast sometimes, but come back and ask ourselves, is the topic clear? Are we in the woods? Okay, dear students, co-students, how are you doing? So I lost myself 20 lessons before. Well, then if that's the answer, if that's a true answer, maybe we should rewind the tape and go a little bit deeper into the story instead of just trying to rush and finish by certain deadline misechta so we can move to the next one. So this is just my opinions, right or wrong. This is just an Amar, it's Lev presenting something that is kind of interesting to me. Maybe other people agree with me. Maybe they don't disagree. I hope that nobody will take offense. I said how it is. Please don't get insulted if I said, well, you asked this question. We have a right. We live in a democratic country after all, almost democratic world. We have a right to ask questions. So I'm asking these questions. The logic I just presented has holes. The way I explain it is not entirely clear, but I hope it's a little bit more clearer than before we started. So with that, hopefully we can continue that. And thank you so much, Jeff, for your lessons that you teach us. It's a wonderful class, and we'll continue attending the class. And hopefully other people can join in and maybe likewise try to explain. Maybe once in a while you should stop the class as a suggestion, Jeff, and say, well, can anybody else in his or her own words, like in 5 minutes, explain? Or I heard this expression, many teachers know it, that the rules of good teaching is tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you have told them. That implies repetition. So instead of going fast, sometimes we'll slow down. Did you guys get it, what we said? Tell me, how do you understand it? Well, I understand it that 2 + 3 is 5. Good. If I say 2 + 3 is 4, hold on, let's go back. So every so often must be a checkpoint. Did we get it? Maybe we don't need to get it 100%. We'll never be able to get it 100%, but at least enough to make it as a stone to which we can set our feet and go to the next one. What holds the stone, we might not be exactly clear, but at least we're moving on the solid ground instead of just getting lost. So thanks again for that. This is just my input. I hope you'll take it as a constructive, with my intention being loving, supportive, and in the spirit of the Torah. Shavua Tov or Shabbat Shalom, if you will watch that a little bit later towards the end of the week. All the best from Be'er Sheva.